Genesis chapter 30 describes a series of events involving Jacob, his wives Leah and Rachel, and the birth of his sons. Here's a summary of the chapter. Before we start, we'd like to ask for your support. If you enjoy our video, please hit the like button. This will help us reach more people and create content for you. Now let's get started with today's video. Genesis 30, the growth of Jacob's family and his prosperity. Genesis chapter 30 is a continuation of the family narrative of Jacob, focusing on his relationships with his wives, Leah and Rachel, the birth of his many children, and his growing wealth under his father-in-law Laban's household. This chapter serves as a pivotal moment in Jacob's journey, revealing not only the building of the 12 tribes of Israel but also the development of Jacob's complex relationships, and his shrewdness in securing his prosperity. Rachel's barrenness and Leah's fertility. At the beginning of this chapter, we encounter Rachel, Jacob's favored wife, in deep distress. Rachel, who had not yet borne Jacob any children, becomes jealous of her sister Leah, who has already given Jacob multiple sons. This rivalry is at the heart of much of the conflict in Jacob's household. Rachel's anguish over her barrenness is not simply a matter of personal sorrow, but it reflects the cultural importance of childbearing in ancient times, especially for women. Bearing children, particularly sons, was seen as the primary way a woman could secure her place and status in the family. Sons were essential for the continuity of the family line, and they were regarded as a blessing from God. Rachel's plea to Jacob in Genesis 30 verse 1 is telling of her despair: "Give me children, or I'll die." Jacob, however, responds in frustration, stating, "Am I in the place of God, who has kept you from having children?" Genesis 30 verse 2. This interaction illustrates two important points. First, it shows that Jacob recognizes the ultimate sovereignty of God in determining who bears children and when. Second, it reveals the limits of Jacob's ability to alleviate Rachel's suffering, placing the responsibility for fertility squarely in God's hands. The role of Bilhah and Zilpah, surrogacy in the ancient world. In response to her inability to conceive, Rachel follows a practice that was culturally acceptable at the time. She gives her maidservant Bilhah to Jacob as a surrogate wife, allowing Bilhah to bear children on her behalf. This practice mirrors what Sarah did with her servant Hagar earlier in Genesis when she could not conceive a child with Abraham. Bilhah bears two sons for Jacob, Dan and Naphtali. Upon the birth of Dan, Rachel exclaims, "God has vindicated me, he has listened to my plea and given me a son." Genesis 30 verse 6. Her naming of Naphtali also reflects her competitive spirit toward Leah, saying, "I have had a great struggle with my sister, and I have won." Genesis 30 verse 8. Leah, not to be outdone, employs the same strategy by giving her maidservant Zilpah to Jacob. Zilpah bears two more sons, Gad and Asher, who are considered part of Leah's offspring. This series of surrogate births underscores the intense competition between the two sisters and their desire to outdo one another in producing heirs for Jacob. The Mandrakes incident, a bargain for a night with Jacob. One of the more curious and culturally rich episodes in Genesis 30 is the incident involving mandrakes. Mandrakes were believed to have fertility-enhancing properties in the ancient Near East, and this belief becomes central to the next stage of the narrative. Reuben, Leah's firstborn son, finds some mandrakes in the field during the harvest and brings them to his mother. Rachel, eager to increase her chances of conceiving, asks Leah for some of the mandrakes. Leah responds sharply, "Wasn't it enough that you took away my husband? Will you take my son's mandrakes too?" Genesis 30 verse 15. This exchange reveals the lingering tension between the sisters regarding their competition for Jacob's affections. Leah, who had initially won Jacob's marital bed by trickery, now feels that Rachel has taken her rightful place in his heart. In a curious twist, Rachel agrees to trade a night with Jacob in exchange for the mandrakes. That evening, Leah goes out to meet Jacob and informs him of the arrangement, saying, "You must sleep with me. I have hired you with my son's mandrakes." Genesis 30 verse 16. As a result, Leah conceives again, giving birth to a son named Issachar. This episode emphasizes the commodification of Jacob's presence and the lengths to which these women go to secure their status and progeny. Leah continues to bear children, eventually giving birth to another son, Zebulun, and a daughter, Dinah. The birth of Dinah is notable, as she will play a significant role in later narratives in the book of Genesis. Rachel's prayer and the birth of Joseph. Finally, after years of barrenness, Rachel's prayers are answered, and God grants her the ability to conceive. She gives birth to a son, Joseph, whose name means, "May he add," signifying her hope for yet another son in the future. Joseph's birth marks a turning point for Rachel and is significant in the larger biblical narrative, as Joseph will go on to become a central figure in the latter part of Genesis, rising to a position of power in Egypt. Rachel's exclamation after Joseph's birth, "God has taken away my disgrace," Genesis 30 verse 23, reflects the cultural stigma associated with barrenness and the importance of childbearing in securing a woman's dignity. Rachel's story is a powerful reminder of how deeply personal the struggle for fertility was for women in ancient times, as well as a testament to God's power to change circumstances in response to prayer. Jacob's agreement with Laban and the growth of his wealth. With the birth of Joseph, Jacob begins to turn his attention to his future. After many years of serving Laban, Jacob desires to return to his homeland. He approaches Laban and asks for permission to leave. Laban, recognizing that his own wealth and prosperity have increased due to God's blessing on Jacob, persuades Jacob to stay by offering him a share of the livestock as wages. Jacob's request is both modest and strategic. He asks to take only the speckled, spotted, and dark-colored sheep and goats from Laban's flock, which are generally considered less desirable than the pure white sheep and solid-colored goats. Laban readily agrees, thinking that Jacob's portion would be small and manageable. However, Jacob devises a plan to increase his share of the flock. He places peeled branches in front of the watering troughs where the animals mate, with the belief that seeing these streaked or spotted branches would influence the animals to produce offspring with similar markings. While the text does not explain the scientific basis for this method, it highlights Jacob's resourcefulness and shrewdness in using whatever means were available to him to increase his wealth. Over time, Jacob's flock grows significantly, and he becomes exceedingly prosperous. The chapter concludes by noting that Jacob became wealthy, with large flocks, servants, camels, and donkeys. Themes and reflections in Genesis 30. God's sovereignty and human agency. Throughout this chapter, the tension between human effort and divine sovereignty is evident. Rachel and Leah both use various strategies, including surrogate motherhood and trading mandrakes, to secure children, yet it is ultimately God who opens and closes the womb. The births of both Joseph and Leah's earlier sons are explicitly attributed to God's intervention. This theme speaks to the larger biblical narrative of God's control over human destiny, while also highlighting the agency and persistence of the women in Jacob's household. Competition and strife in family dynamics. The rivalry between Rachel and Leah is one of the central elements of this chapter. Their competition for Jacob's love and for the honor of bearing children drives much of the action. The tension between the sisters reflects the difficulties that arise in polygamous households, where the affections and resources of the husband are divided. This conflict also speaks to broader themes of jealousy and the human desire for validation and worth through relationships and achievements. The importance of fertility and children in ancient culture, fertility and the bearing of children, particularly sons, are recurring themes in the Genesis narrative. In a society where inheritance and family legacy were of paramount importance, the ability to bear children was directly tied to a woman's status and security. The birth of each son is celebrated not only as an addition to the family but as a sign of divine favor and blessing. Jacob's cunning and prosperity. Jacob's dealings with Laban reveal his cleverness and ability to navigate complex situations to his advantage. From the beginning of his story, Jacob has been characterized as a shrewd and resourceful individual, and this chapter continues that theme. His success in increasing his flock at Laban's expense foreshadows his eventual return to his homeland as a wealthy and independent man. God's faithfulness in building the nation of Israel, the 12 sons of Jacob, born through Leah, Rachel, Bilhah, and Zilpah, will become the heads of the 12 tribes of Israel. This chapter marks the beginning of the fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that their descendants would be as numerous as the stars and that they would form a great nation. Conclusion. Genesis chapter 30 provides a rich and detailed narrative that highlights the complex interpersonal relationships within Jacob's family, and God's continued involvement in the fulfillment of his promises. The chapter showcases the intense struggle for status and security through childbearing, the cleverness of Jacob in securing his wealth, and God's. Please subscribe my YouTube channel. I hope you like this video. Thank you.